Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Tamsin Rose, and I have the great pleasure to be your moderator. I'm really excited to be introducing the EPALE Community Conference 2022. And this year, we're going to be the conference is looking at the power of imagination and adult learning in shaping an enriching, sustainable, and inclusive Europe. Apologies, I'm going to try and stop the blinking on my phone. Thank you. So, in the current situation, surrounded by multiple crises, how do we find a way forward? We're facing an appalling war on the continent of Europe, which we haven't seen for generations. We've got climate change, we've got demographic shift, we've got economic crisis. And when all of these things come together, the question we're asking ourselves is how do we move forward? It can feel paralyzing to have so many different challenges ahead. And we want to explore what's the role of education in helping us to find a path forward. Ipale believes in the power of imagination to help us rethink the present, unlock new possibilities, and create a better future. In this conference, we will challenge ourselves, and you will challenge yourself to step outside your comfort zone, to try to imagine. That's our theme through the next few days, and we'll be encouraging you to interact with us on that idea, to imagine something different. We want you to imagine innovative solutions, creative ideas, new practices, and new futures. We're going to begin our conference today by exploring the multiple ways that communities can be shaped around and through learning. And before we get into the content, let me take this opportunity to celebrate that we now have just hit the milestone of 120,000 members on the EPALE platform. We're delighted so many people have come together around this idea of learning for adults, giving education an opportunity to build a new life. For our conference over the next few days, you can watch us live, but if you want to interact with us, if you want to comment and share your ideas, you need to be registered on the EPALE community website, and that's how you'll be able to engage with us. So you need to sign up and log in order to have that valuable interaction. We hope that you also engage with us across the social media, and you can find EPALE on Facebook, on Twitter, and LinkedIn. Our call to action this year and the hashtag we're using is Imagine Ipale. And we're using that hashtag so that we can find out what you're thinking. What's your imagination? What could you create when we put our minds together? We want you to share your selfies, your drawings, your ideas, your pictures, your visual notes, your buzzwords, anything that you want to share. And that's a way of inviting us to co create together, even though we may be physically separate. Our minds can come together and we can create an amazing new imagination together. So use the hashtag ImagineIpali on social media so we can track the conversation and we can see who's part of you. So today we have a mixture of plenaries and workshops, and it's the same over the next few days. So let me just encourage you to let you know that we have some workshops. There are 4 workshops. That's the 18th and the 19th in the morning and in the afternoon. That's today, tomorrow, and on Thursday in the afternoon. These are accessible only if you register because the participation slots are limited. So that's another reason to go to the EPALE website, create an account. You can register for the workshops and you can engage with us. So let me just tell you that on the 18th this morning between 11:30 and 12:30, our workshop is on community-based practices for empowerment. On the 19th, that's tomorrow, between 11:30 and 12:30, our workshop is Speak Your Voice, Free Your Future. Followed later in the afternoon between 4:30 and 5:30, we've got a workshop on aligning skills and motivation for human-centered learning. And finally, on the 20th of October, that's on the Thursday between 12 and 1, our workshop is on creative ways to engage people with culture. In addition to our formal program of plenary and workshops, we've also got 17 national side events, and those will take place in the national languages, and they're organised by the National Support Services. So I want to say a warm thank you to colleagues from Austria, from the German-speaking part of Belgium and the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, from Bosnia-Herzegovina, from Croatia, Germany, Finland, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Malta, Montenegro, Netherlands, Poland, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Spain. You've all chosen as national support services to have a national event in your local language to build up the local community and help share, which is fantastic. Thank you. Just to let you know that today, the national side events are happening in Austria, in the Dutch speaking part of Belgium, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Croatia, in Finland, in Latvia, in the Netherlands, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Spain. So I hope you're all enjoying this activity in those different countries. We wanted to get a sense, a flavor of what's happening in those different countries. So we will have an opportunity over the next few days to engage and contact with them. And later today, we'll have a connection in with colleagues in Austria, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Slovakia. And you can find out more information about what they're doing and how they're doing it on the homepage. But this was just some highlights that you can expect to see over the next few days with the EPALE Community Conference. And as I said, our focus is imagine. We want you to imagine something different. We want you to dream in a better way. So that's the end of my introduction. And I'd now like to pass the floor to the European Commission, who is, of course, the funder and the partner and the organizer of the EPALE system. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker. That's Sophia Eriksson Waterschut. She's from the European Commission. Hello, good morning, Sophia. She is the Director for Youth, Education and Erasmus Plus, which we know has recently celebrated more than 30 years of existence, strategic education and culture. Sophia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. It's great to see you, and it's great to see everybody. Good morning, I should say, to all of you out there, dear EPALE friends. So I'm really pleased to be here and together with my colleague Manuela Geleng to open the 5th EPALE Community Conference. And I agree with you, Tamsin, this conference has a very inspiring title, and I'm sure it will mean that the whole conference will give a lot of inspiration, because making us imagine together what can be more inspiring than that. And of course, we need this because we need to imagine and we need to be inspired to be able to go towards a sustainable and a more inclusive Europe. And as imagining means rethinking and unlocking new possibilities and even creating new futures, I think the conference themes goes very much in the hands of the 22 European Year of Youth. And the European Year of Youth, which is now happening, we are in the 10th month of it, it is a lot about creating opportunities. And many of these opportunities are about learning through education, training, but non-formal and informal learning. And learning is necessary in these challenging times that you also mentioned, Tamsin, to tackle the big societal developments, the green and digital transitions, and also handle the repercussions of a pandemic. But learning also needs to be grounded in values. And during this year, unfortunately, we have witnessed how values we perhaps took for granted have been severely challenged. I'm thinking, of course, of the brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine, where unfortunately values like peace, democracy, justice, and solidarity cannot be highlighted enough of their importance. During the European Year of Youth, of course, EPALE takes part. We have been looking a lot at young adults from a specific point of view, intergenerational learning to build partnerships and social cohesion, but also civic skills to become active participants in the society, a big focus on low-skilled young adults, how important it is to allow everybody to be equipped with the necessary skills. And young adults also represent a group where we've seen patterns of emerging new learning cultures, and we can actually track more easily these kind of innovative practices. And hopefully this can also be embraced by the whole adult learning community. Now, the European Year of Youth is kickstarting, we hope, a continued focus on young people. Actually, all years should be years of youth hereafter. But there's some good news here that already in 23, we see a clear continuation, because the European or the Commission President And now Ursula von der Leyen announced in her State of the Union speech the European Year of Skills for 2023. So this is an excellent transition to an even stronger focus on learning. And I'm sure my colleague Manuela, who is in charge of that year, will for sure expand on this. And it goes without saying that EPALE and the whole adult learning community will also play an important role in making the skills year happen. And you mentioned it already in the introduction, but EPALE is a continued success story. And indeed, currently it counts more than 120,000 members, and it attracts actually thousands of visitors every day. So it is a strong and vivid community, and we see a lot of sharing and learning and a lot of innovative ideas there, inspiring practices. And what is great is, of course, that all this is available to the adult learning community across Europe. And EPALE is part of the flagship Erasmus Plus program. And indeed, this year, Erasmus is celebrating its 35th anniversary, and that's very much worth to celebrate. And we've tried to do that throughout this year. If I may, I would recommend you to watch the recording from end of September, where we had a celebratory moment. We had guests like the Commission Vice President Skinas, Commissioner Gabriel, and also meet up with beneficiaries. It's available out there on the web. Well, it wasn't easy, that this amazing idea to get off the ground. It was very hard work to convince the member states back in 1987 that we should fund a cross-border mobility program for education, an area where the EU has quite limited competence. Well, the program surpassed every expectation, as you know. As much as anyone ever believed in the potential of Erasmus, notably, or nobody could predict that it would be the defining program of a generation, and probably more to come. And we have today almost 13 million participants in Europe and beyond, across all levels of education and training, youth and sport. And clearly the program has changed many lives, often learning for life. And the success spread from higher education to other sectors. That's why the plus is there. So from school to vocational education and training, from youth actions to sport, and of course, adult education. And the program has grown into a community in its own right. And actually the community is constantly growing. And between 21 and 27, which is the period we are in now for the current Erasmus Plus program, we expect about 10 million participants, from learners to teachers, trainers and educators in all sectors, participating in different mobility activities abroad. And this diversity, this impressive size, really represents what this program has become. And here again, EPALE is on board. EPALE provides several tools and information for adult learning institutions to help them prepare their Erasmus Plus applications. So I can mention, for example, the EPALE Partner Search. That is something that has been recently revamped. And the Partner Search facilitates the exchange of ideas and creates different networking opportunities between individuals and organizations. And now organizations can also include their accreditation in their profile, so potential partners can see it directly. And we have a new banner about Erasmus Plus for adult education. And this is grouping the partner search with different features, such as the so-called Erasmus Plus space. And the Erasmus Plus space is the way that can link Erasmus Plus projects with EPALE. So in this way, blended mobility actually becomes a reality. So I can only appeal to you to make good use of these new tools. Well, unfortunately, as I mentioned, the present times are not the best. The war of aggression in Ukraine has led to millions of people being forced to flee their homes. Urgent actions were taken by the European Commission, and that also happened in the field of education. Actually, we mobilized all our policy cooperation, our tools, and our programs. And that means the Commission promptly used existing European online platforms, such as EPALE. EPALE is hosting now the Erasmus Plus Register of Education and Training Staff for support to Ukrainian refugees. And this register helps organizations running Erasmus Plus mobility projects. So it means the organizations can use their project funds to organize mobility activities for education staff and experts that want to work with Ukrainian refugees. So, and if you have relevant skills actually, and you want to make yourself available to work with the European education and training organizations that welcome Ukrainian refugees, you can click on the Ukraine banner on EPALE's homepage and it will take you further. So again, the adult learning and EPALE community is showing its strength. Now, dear EPALE friends, I think this conference is a great opportunity to continue all this learning and networking. So I wish you great discussions during this conference, and above all, a good moment to imagine. And please be inspired by each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for giving us this broader perspective and recognizing the value and the success of Erasmus Plus, and how now there's this Erasmus Plus space which will bring together the EPALE community with the other parts of the program. And also, again, thank you for highlighting the valuable contribution that members of the EPALE community can make to the effort to provide support to Ukrainian refugees arriving in Europe. This is part of an enormous welcome by citizens to engage and offer support. And it's great to see that there is a mechanism for those who want to engage. So thank you very much. I'd now like to pass the floor to your colleague from the European Commission, to Manuela Geleng, the Director for Skills from DG Employment and Social Affairs. Manuela, welcome to our opening session of the EPALE Community Conference 2022.
Good morning to you all. I'm very happy to be here with you. I will jump straight into the matter, as Sophia already highlighted the context in which we are currently living, in a sequence of crises. The last one, the Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, the effects of high inflation, the energy crisis. And this is just the latest developments, but we know that we were already before struggling with the green and digital transitions and a demographic aging, which were already signaling major shifts in the labor market and the skills needs across Europe. So a workforce with the right skills is a crucial factor underpinning the competitiveness of our economy now and tomorrow. A skilled workforce is actually a key driver for sustainable growth, for innovation and competitiveness. And indeed, if I look at the data, I see that 77% of companies are struggling to find employees with the required skills. We have 28 sectors where there are shortages. And these shortages are in very varied sectors, ranging from healthcare to hospitality, IT, construction, security, cybersecurity, workers in science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And skills are in need, both low-skilled as well as high-skilled. And indeed, I'm saying all of this because our labor market can function smoothly, not just if there is a workforce with the right skills, but also if there is the individual's engagement on up and reskilling. And if we look at the situation nowadays, we see that only 37% of adults undertake training at least once a year. And if we look at digital skills, which are crucially important if you want to have a job, because 90% of jobs nowadays require some sort of digital skills, we also see that there adults are lagging behind. Due to the COVID pandemic and the protracted lockdowns, we now see that almost 1 out of 3 adults want to quit the job in the next months. Obviously, because the labor markets were blocked, there was not possibility to transition to other jobs, but also because they are in search of better jobs. I think the pandemic has learned us many things, and clearly also the high inflation pushes people to find better jobs. And between these people, there are also those that would like to stay in their company if they could reskill and achieve a progression in their job. So this is what is happening in the workforce, in the European workforce, but it's also clear that the domestic workforce that we have is not sufficient to meet the current and future labor market demands. And here, third country nationals can play a very important role. So the challenge for the European labor market is also to be able to attract talent from abroad. And if I had this introduction, is because this is actually the rationale that President von der Leyen put forward during her State of the Union speech in last September in explaining why she was announcing 2023 as the year of skills. So I have set out the background to that, and I think we have 2 important targets here that Europe has set itself for 2030, namely to raise the employment rate of people in working age to 78% by 2030, and to have at least 60% of adults participating in training. Now, we are not starting from scratch because, in fact, a lot has been done in the last years because the skills issue is not new. This includes the Pact for Skills. Certainly, you have come across in your work with it. And in fact, we have now over 700 companies, training institutions, social partners, regions, all stakeholders participating in this pact, joining large-scale partnerships in economic sectors. And they have already, these 700 bodies, pledged to over 6 million training opportunities for working age people. In June, we adopted, member states adopted 2 important council recommendations, one on individual learning accounts and one on micro-credentials. Because you work with adults and you know very well how difficult it is to bring adults towards up and reskilling. And that's why these 2 recommendations are really crucial in stimulating the demand of people to upskill and reskill. And once they do that, to also receive recognition through micro-credential for what they have done, for their efforts. Significant EU funding support has also been put on the table, both through the Recovery and Resilience Facility, also through the ESF Plus, and there are several other funds that all focus on the skills, upskilling and reskilling, because it's really crucial. So I think I've highlighted how important your role actually is in bringing the adult learning community together in addressing this challenge. And while in the next few days, you will be looking at 4 important topics like learning community, young adults, skills revolution, culture and creativity, you will be actually also gearing up for what will be the year of skills, because you are the key actors that join forces with on the labor market with public employment services, social partners, company, to bring more and better jobs, because skills means jobs. This is what Commissioner Schmidt says, that about the crucial importance of skills in jobs. And jobs mean also a better future with adults, for adults. So with that thought, I leave you, and I wish you all success in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela. And again, it's very interesting to hear how this Europe is bringing together, mobilizing so many people through the Pact for Skills, because it's seen as so key to our futures. And really quite strong statistics you shared with us. 1 in 3 adults want to leave their job and do something different as a result of their experiences over the last few years. So clearly, people are looking at making big changes in their lives, and the role of education to help people find the path that they want, that they would find more fulfilling or that meets their requirements for their job and their home work-life balance, is really high. So I think the EPALE community has a lot ahead of them to try and support people through those changes. So thank you very much to Manuela. Now, we promised you that we would be connecting to some of the 17 different national support services that are organising workshops or holding screenings of our conference. And we'll do that just now. I'm delighted that we're going to make a brief connection into 3 of our NSS. So this is going to be a little bit like a music contest that you probably all know. So let me start by saying we are going to connect with Austria, with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Slovakia. But let me start with Austria. Hello, Austria. Lovely to see you all. So tell me, where are you connecting to us from?
From Dornbirn.
Excellent. And what are you doing? What's the activity you've set up?
Well, we have a combined seminar of EPALE and Erasmus Plus adult education, and we are in the region of Vorarlberg. Therefore we're in Dornbirn, so we have an exchange on life skills in the framework of those 2 programs, more or less. And we're watching together the keynote, and then we go on discussing.
Brilliant. Well, we're delighted that you're organising an event, and I can see through the window just behind you, it looks like lovely weather. Is it sunny? Thank you for bringing some green living trees into our conversation, our screen. And I know we'll be connecting with you a little bit later, but thank you to the team from Austria.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move a little bit further into the Balkans, and welcome to colleagues from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Hello, where are you?
Thank you, Tamsin. The connection is good. Good morning from Banja Luka. It's a great pleasure to be a part of such an important community conference. And I'm happy to greet the adult learning community in Europe on behalf of NSS EPALE Bosnia and Herzegovina and national. We have gathered here today for this great event and to explore ways that communities can be shaped through and around learning. After the live stream sessions inspired by today's speeches, together with our national ambassadors, we will discuss on today's topic during our mini conference called EPALE Ambassadors for Learning Communities. On behalf of for pre-primary, primary and secondary education and NSS EPALE team from Bosnia and Herzegovina, I wish us all a fruitful conference. Greetings.
Thank you very much to the colleagues in Bosnia and Herzegovina joining us from Banja Luka. Have a wonderful day. We look forward to hearing from you again. Now we're going to move in our geography and welcome to the team in Slovakia. Hello. You need to unmute.
Yes,
There you go.
dobrý deň. Hello from Slovakia. Good morning, Europe. Yes, dobrý deň. Hello from Slovakia. Good morning, Europe.
We are very pleased to greet you from Bratislava with our EPALE supporters, users, and other stakeholders and actors in adult education, and some more joining us later this morning for our national event.
Thank you. Just tell us, what is your activity today? What is your national event
We wish
about?
all of us a successful and inspiring conference.
What is your activity today? What is your national event about?
Later this morning, we will gather to discuss a very hot topic, which is citizenship and global education of adults.
Excellent. Thank you so much to Slovakia for joining us, and good luck with your events. Excellent. Thank you so much to Slovakia for joining us, and good luck with your events. So we promised everyone that there would be a chance to just say hello to teams all across Europe. And those are just 3 of the 17 different events that are happening in parallel and in connection to this event. So we want to show you that we really truly are mobilizing the community. And as we said, we're celebrating more than 120,000 people who have connected and joined the EPALE platform to be part of the conversation. So thank you to Austria, Slovakia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's my great pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, and we're going to move into really unique and interesting territory. The title of this talk is The Limits of Modern Education in Times of Hypercomplexity. And at the beginning, I explained that it feels a little bit like we're living in an era of permanent crisis. So many big problems in the world. What does education do to equip us to deal with this? So joining me is Professor Vanessa de Olivieri Andriotti. She's in the Canada Research Chair in Race, Inequalities and Global Change at the Department of Education Studies at the University of British Columbia. She's a very well-known scholar and likes to encourage us to think outside the box and to challenge. And we're absolutely delighted that she got up in the middle of her night to join us and to be part of this conversation. She's particularly interested in, she's the co-founder of something called Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Arts and Research Collective. And this is the basis of your latest book, which is called Hospicing Modernity, Facing Humanity's Wrongs and the Implications for Social Activism. So I can already tell that we're going to have an interesting and a challenging talk. And I know that you're going to encourage people to look around them and imagine a different world. And that's the theme of our EPALE. But that's, change is not always easy. And looking beyond where you are with a critical view is sometimes it's not always comfortable. And I know that that's an area you're going to help us talk through it. But first of all, you're going to be introducing us to a new acronym, something called VUCA. Introducing us to the VUCA world, which is where the world is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex and ambiguous. That's what the VUCA stands for, which means that the world is changing so much. And that's not something necessarily that we are ready to deal with. So you, in this context of the permacrisis, where everyone's trying to find their way through, you propose a different way at looking at the current challenges, a way that we can take on all ourselves responsibility for change. So how would you define the environment we've got around it, and how would we find our place in it?
Thank you, Tamsin, for the opportunity to be here and for the invitation to speak today. It is 1 a.m, so I'm not sure how intelligible I'm going to be, but I'll try. So our environment today is characterized by these wicked challenges and exponential VUCA, as you explained before, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And this environment and the challenges of this environment is very particular to our times. And it's not something modern education really equips us well for. So modern education teaches us to look for certainties, to find quick fixes, and to aspire for more entitlements within the current system, which in itself is both violent and unsustainable and is faltering at this moment. So this focus on certainties and quick fixes leaves us unequipped to face the crises and wicked problems of our times. Wicked problems are different from regular problems. A wicked challenge or a problem has multiple moving layers of complexity, so stacked layers of complexity, many unknowns, and a much longer temporality. And when you try to fix something in one place, it creates a problem in another place. So for example, of a regular problem, you can think about planning a trip with 2 toddlers. This is a regular problem because if you plan it really well, you can still do it. But raising these 2 toddlers in this current society and to become responsible people in a society and culture that encourages the opposite is a wicked challenge. So education itself is a wicked challenge as we face society changing at the pace it is changing today. So we may have people in the current educational system who are technically very competent in their expertise, but who are unprepared to deal with the complexity both within them and external to them. So this person will not be able to work, for example, with people who don't agree with them and will be easily overwhelmed and immobilized when they face the complexities, paradoxes, mistakes, or failure in their field. And the resilience that we need to be able to navigate VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, requires new capacities relating to processing these complexities both within us and around us. So today we see everywhere an increase in anxiety, depression, self-harm, and this is across ages and socioeconomic status, but it also affects particularly young people. So young people have a different investment in this also because their future is at stake. And we can see with the perma crisis that the concerns around the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, economic instability are really weighing on these people. So they're carrying all these emotions, these complex emotions and the complexities of society on their backs. And we need a kind of education that can take this weight from the back and strengthen the muscles of their arms and the steadiness of their legs to be able to see this complexity in front of them and be able to navigate this complexity. But in Brazil, where I come from, there is a saying that when the waters are rising, it's only when the water reaches our hips that we can actually swim. So it is the crisis themselves, the perma crisis, that is going to force us to see education in a different way and to be able to swim in these different waters, to learn to swim or to create a raft for these different waters. And in this different relationship with the water, we will also need to learn to dive and to realize that our bodies are water and we are the water around us, but we are also what we've done to the water up to this point, including the pollution that we have created that now makes it impossible for us to drink it. So this understanding of both how we are part of the problem and how we are part of the solution is part of this complexity that we need to teach in education and through education. And this is hard because if we are very used to and familiar only with the comforts of consumption and convenience, and if we only feel safety when there's certainty and control, this learning is going to be very uncomfortable. But we need to be able to feel comfortable with this discomfort and to learn to work with the senses and to be okay with uncertainty and with complexity. So without these changes in disposition, we will drown. And this is difficult internal work that we have to do, but we need to do it. We need to do it in this internal work ourselves so that we also don't become work for other people. So we need to find a different way to coexist and to be able to weather the storms together.
Thank you very much. There was so many really interesting images and ideas that came in there. Not least the fact that this is difficult internal work that we have to be able to do, but it's partly about working with our senses. And I thought this is a really useful analogy. You've Your work particularly looks at gesturing towards decolonial futures. And given that colonialism, we're talking in Europe, this is the heart of colonialism. This is where it came from. This is the image that we've put on the rest of the world. When you talk about gesturing towards decolonial futures as a possible learning or unlearning, as a way to build our resilience, what does that actually mean? And what are the steps that we need to go through?
So part of the work of the collective has been to try to map what is necessary for us to deactivate the dispositions that are no longer working in the current society, and to activate other dispositions and capacities that we will need in order to survive in this different environment. So we need to activate different intellectual, affective, and relational dispositions to navigate the storms together. And one interesting thing that we've learned working with Indigenous communities here in what's known as Canada and in Brazil is that the process of activating these capacities can be seen very differently from different cultures. So for example, in Brazil, one of the critiques that people have, these Indigenous communities have of Western societies, is that they say Western societies think that by changing thinking, the body will follow and the behavior will change. And they don't believe in the same thing. They say that we need to educate us, work together with the heart, and then the head follows. So it's a very different understanding of how learning and unlearning takes place, but also how the human being operates. And changing the guts means changing the ways we have conditioned to think, to feel, to relate, to do, to hope, to dream, and to imagine. And understanding how the current ways we have for doing this have actually contributed to the multiple crises we are facing at the moment. So my research team has mapped 7 important dispositions that modern schools do not teach. And I will talk only about 2 of them. So the first one is the ability to see the different layers of complexity of reality in the bigger picture, and not to try to put the world into a tidy box of certainties and idealizations. The second one is to process the complex emotions that come with looking at the aspects of reality that we don't like and that are difficult to hold. We need to learn to face painful things without feeling immobilized or overwhelmed by the discomfort. And here it's interesting because if we think about it in the context of the climate catastrophe and biodiversity loss, for example, we see a lot of people saying that in order for us to be hopeful, we need to be just offering people solutions. And what happens when we do that is that if we make it look easy, especially for young people, they might go for that and be hopeful at that point. But the moment that they face the complexities of the issues, that motivation goes away and there is a crash. So what I'm arguing here is that we need to prepare people for the long haul of this work, to have the resilience to face the complexities, to face the failures, to face the mistakes, and not to give up, because these problems are not going to go away tomorrow. And the quick fixes are actually also part of the problem. This doesn't mean that we're going to be immobilized, but that we're going to be doing things in a very different ways. And it means that our desires for predetermined answers or easy solutions, they need to be examined, and we need to disinvest in them. And in that sense, too, it's very important to understand that the comforts that we have and the possibilities of the consumption and convenience that we have in the global north only exists because other crises and collapses have been created in nature, but also in the Global South for many different communities. So these communities actually have a lot to teach us in terms of how to be resilient and how to survive when the environment is not necessarily what we want it to be. So understanding how to learn especially resilience from other communities is extremely important at this point.
Thank you. And it's extremely challenging to listen to this, because I can't tell you the number of meetings that I'm at where we talk about change and we all say, where are the quick wins? We need a quick fix, quick wins, and that will, the low hanging fruits, this is what will get people involved. And the basic idea of advocacy is you try to make the right thing the easy thing, with this assumption that if you make things easy and convenient and accessible, low threshold behavior, then that's how you get success. But you're arguing for something entirely different, which is really interesting. So how can we engage and be taught by these different systems of knowledge and being that you've just referred to?
So the most important thing, I think, as we engage with different ways of knowing and being, is to do this with cultural humility, to recognize the complexity also of these different ways of being, and to learn to build relations based on trust, respect, consent, reciprocity, and accountability, with the understanding that each of these words, trust, respect, consent, reciprocity, and accountability, have deeper layers of meaning and can be understood differently in different contexts. So I work with Indigenous communities, as I said, in Brazil and Canada, and the basic message we hear is that the Western culture needs to shed its arrogance, to recognize and address the harms it has caused to itself and to the rest of nature, and including us as part of nature, so that it can show up differently, which means accepting responsibility for growing older, rather than remaining in this immature state that we are, that is fixed on this quick fixes and solutions. So the shedding of arrogance is very difficult. It requires us to sit at the limits of, for example, what education has done, both in terms of acknowledging its gifts. Yes, there have been gifts in modern education, but there are also limitations. In the same way that it opens up worlds, it also closes down worlds. And this is related, for example, to the single story that is promoted through modern education about progress, one single way of looking at progress, one single way of looking at development, one single way of looking at civilization. And this way of looking at the world has looked down on other traditions, other communities, other types of value. And the idea is not to replace one for the other, but to decenter this and center the problems that we have at this time, which are the planet, basically, and the possibility of us creating the conditions for our own extinction, and getting the insights and the wisdom from different cultures to be able to be in an ecology of knowledge, is trying to address this problem together. But in this engagement, what we see many times is an idealization or romanticization of Indigenous communities. And this is not what I'm talking about, because the idealization and romanticization is also a quick fix, a simple solution. And when we have people engaging with these cultures from an idealized and romanticized position, when they see the complexities of the culture, the motivation also goes away. So we're not talking about idealizing and romanticizing. We're talking about understanding that every single community is complex. People are complex as individuals. Communities are complex in themselves. They are different from each other. But they also have developed capacities and practices of survival in very unfavorable circumstances in many ways. And they have developed a form of resilience that shows us that they might not have the answers to replace or to solve the problems in our context, but they show us that as human beings, we can swim and we can find the adaptability necessary to navigate this choppy waters and to weather the storms together. So they have, the communities I work with, for example, have a lot of experience in the Amazon, for example, of fighting against predatory industries, and they are trying to defend the forest as something that is alive, that is not a resource or property, but something that is connected to their livelihoods, that they see the forest as part of their family. And that understanding in itself has a gift for us in the ecology of knowledges that I talked about before, in offering a different way to relate to the forest, to relate to the planet, and to understand the forest's wisdom. We have communities in Brazil also fighting against offshore windmills, showing the colonialism of climate change mitigation, for example. And they're saying that these windmills in the sea are affecting how the ocean lives as an entity, and how the fish and the waters and the currents around that behave and relate back to the humans. So that perspective that represents the rivers, the oceans, the trees, needs to be present in our discussions about our future and the possibility of life for future generations, not only of humans, but also of non-human beings. However, it's very important to emphasize that we can't just simply replace one knowledge for another. We need a different way of connecting and integrating knowledge that is not about the certainties that were used before, that really can show the different layers of complexity of what we're facing today, and of the knowledges themselves, in the communities and the people that carry these knowledges. So back to the question of cultural humility. Cultural humility is about understanding the limits of our own culture, and that we are missing out on things that we can't see because we have been conditioned and socialized to think in a certain way. And being able to engage with these communities with trust, respect, consent, reciprocity, and accountability is also a hard work, because our culture doesn't necessarily emphasize these aspects in our own education. But engaging with these cultures is extremely useful for us to learn the resilience that will be necessary as we face the meta crisis or the perma crisis that is placed before us at the moment.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. As promised, you have invited us to look around at the comfortable spaces, the physical spaces, and our sort of mental construct of the world, and to recognize the gift that it gives us, but the limitation, and invited us to be comfortable with uncomfortableness, with looking at not searching for quick fixes in a single story, but for those multiple levels. Now, I know many of our audience will have been very inspired and found it thought-provoking, but I would like to invite our colleagues from Austria. I think they have a question that they would like to ask you. So, colleagues from Austria, please go ahead. What question would you like to ask Professor Andreotti?
Hello. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa, for this inspiring talk. Yeah, a lot of food for thought for us, indeed. Yeah, in our workshop, we will also be talking about learning communities, life skills, and of course, environmental skills are extremely important. But now to our question, Vanessa. If we look at the community conference title, it's imagination, right? And so we would like to ask you, do you agree with us that when we talk about adult education, we need to imagine new ways of educating, yeah? And just to be able to foster imagination through education. So imagination at the center of adult education. Would you agree with that? And the second question is, how can adult educators, as we are here, support citizens and communities, indeed, in this imaginatory process? Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you for the question. That's an incredible question. Thank you. I do agree we need something else, very different from what we see today. I've been working with the concept of depth education in contrast with mastery education. So mastery education is like putting tea in a cup, measuring the tea, and that's the knowledge that we have. It's about mastering concepts, mastering skills, or if you want another metaphor, it's about like climbing a peak and arriving at the top and achieving that dopamine hit that we have when we got it. Depth education is very different. Depth education is more like peeling onions and crying in the process, but understanding that that's very important in the kitchen and in the creation of the meal, a collective meal. Or it's like diving deep, like in Finland when we do when we cut. I lived in Finland for some time, and I did the deep diving in the frozen ocean when we cut the hole. And then we know that when we dive, we feel first the pain, and then the numbing, and then the body resets and starts to feel very, very warm. And then we remember how to be in the body very differently. So we remember that we are water, and we are the water we are diving into as well. And we are also the problems with the water that we are facing at the moment, right? So depth education for me is one of the ways to bring people to a kind of education that is not prescriptive, but diagnostic, that really helps us not be exposed to information, but process both cognitively the information, emotionally the emotions, and relationally. And that's related, I think, to the question of imagination that you asked. We tend to think about imagination as what creates the possibilities for the future. But from the indigenous communities that we're working with, that idea is actually challenged. So what they say is that when we create an image, that image is already coming from the reference that we already have. So they have practices that are about deconstructing these images and allowing the earth to dream through you, to imagine through you. And that's very different. The other thing that they say is that they find it interesting that we associate hope and imagination with the future, when the future actually depends much more on the relationships we build in the present. So it's a weaving of relationships in the present. So the future depends more on that than on an image that we built and then that we try to convince others about. So when I heard that critique, it really made me stop to think about the amount of time we're spending in creating images in our head as a way to escape the difficult work of actually repairing the relations. And the relations they are talking about are relationships with the land, relationships with the other animals, we're animals too, but the other animals, the non-human beings, relationship with the rivers, relationship with the mountains, and relationship with the possibility of future generations to have a possibility of existence. So for me, the imagination is important. Yes, definitely. And we need to figure out a way of opening it up so that these other beings, these other entities can also have a say in what we can imagine, not just imposing the human imagination from a specific culture as the only way or the single story that everybody could adopt. We need to open it up and then complexify it even more. So inviting people to this process requires the cultural humility that I talked about before, but also this sense that there's so much we're missing out on, and that the ways of being that we have upheld so far actually have contributed to the crisis. So we will need more possibilities of engagement and different ways of imagining as we walk into the storm together.
Thank you very much, Professor Andriotti. It was the middle of the night for you, but it's the start of our day here. And what a fantastic imaginatory journey you have taken us from. And the key message is there about, if you can invite others to come in and co-create with you, it opens up so many more possibilities. And that the hope is not something that sits in the future. It's something that we activate now. And if we bring it to now, that gives us many more options. So you really started the day for us and started our conference in a fantastic way. So a warm thank you on behalf of all of our participants for spending time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're now going to move to our panel conversation looking at education, community and memory. Now, we just heard about the challenges if you think that the world has only one single story and therefore one single truth. Our panel that we're about to meet is going to explore how you address contested memories, if people have different views, different recollections, different parts of history, and with the conflict that we have on the European territory right now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is partly to do with different visions of history, different visions of identity. So we're going to explore, we have a brilliant panel. So let me introduce, and I'll bring them in. We have Laura Ferraud, who is a teacher and researcher at ADN, which is Archivio Diaristico Nazionale di Pieve Santo Stefano. I excuse my accent if it's not correct.
No, it's great. Good morning.
We have good morning. We have Dineke Stam, a specialist in the interculturalization of the Intercultural Museum and Heritage Projects.
Good morning.
Good morning. We have Eline Siep, the Associate Professor in European Studies at Maastricht University. Good morning, Eline. And we have Maya Meyer Ossa, an educator and curator at Zanis Lipka Memorial in Riga. So just to put some context, good morning. What we're going to discuss today is that, communities take a shape around their shared history, the stories they tell themselves and each other. But those communities can also be divided by contested memories and very conflicted ways of viewing history. And in the European context, most recently, we've seen a very worrying rise of the far-right political parties and the way that memory is questioned, used and misused. So, for example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also the perspectives looking back. I come from the UK, and we are rethinking our view of the respected figures of the last few hundred years, where we've got, their names are on our big buildings, we've got statues, and now we're looking back saying, well, hang on, what was that relationship to slavery, for example? What was their role in oppression of different people? So we're having to rethink that, and other people find that very challenging because it feels like they're taking away their history and their past. So we know these are examples where history, tradition, and identity can sometimes clash. So what we're going to explore with our panel is what's the role in education in helping to understand, question, and unpack some of these predominant narratives so we can develop something new. And we heard from Professor Andriotti about cultural humility and being open, inviting other people in to have that conversation. I know this is something that I'm sure you'll be picking up on, but I'm going to start with Eline, if I can. What is the role of education in memory and community building?
Well, I think the answer is actually very short. It's fundamental. I'm just going to very briefly explain a little bit why I'm taking the theoretical perspective, but then also moving into some practical examples of why this is fundamental. And basically, I'd like to start off by saying that communities and their identity are very much built on memory. And usually you would talk about collective memory here. Collective memory is a bit of a fuzzy term. There's lots of debate about it, what it actually means. But I think generally speaking, we can distinguish between three different types of memory here that all make up collective memory. One of it is individual memory. So that's basically autobiographic memory, memory that's connected to the individual person, things that you remember. Then you'd have social memory, which is the memory of a group. And that's made up of all the different memories of individuals that come together and basically share this, usually through communicative exchange. And that's where group identity then starts to form. And then you have cultural memory, which is memory that is disconnected from human transmitters, and it's usually transmitted by objects. So just think about what was just mentioned, museums, statues, lieux de mémoire, as they're often called, books, anything that is really not connected to humans directly anymore. And that allows for memory to travel and cross generational boundaries as well. Now, the role of education in this is that it's one of those transmitters. So it shapes individual memory, of course. Education really plays a very fundamental role on the individual level, but it also influences strongly social memory and the way groups define their identities. And it allows for the transmission of cultural memory, because it's independent, if you so want, from the human transmitters. And if you think immediately about textbooks, and then you see how memory can move over time, and it's to a certain extent also, identifying or characterizing specific ways of looking at the world in the classroom. This fundamental role obviously means also that it is very influential. It can be used and it can be abused. And we just heard where this can happen. I think it's not a coincidence that education is usually state-controlled. And what you say about memories, that who controls memories of the past usually also controls the future. I think the same we can really say also about education. So who controls education can control the future. Now, we all know that education is also there, not only happening in schools, but in different parts of society. So I think we have to be a little bit more nuanced here. But generally speaking, I think this is true. And it obviously also means that this can lead to conflict due to the very precise selection of narratives that are being told, that are being selected for educative purposes, etc. And while it has potential for conflict, it obviously also has huge potential for change. It can open up people's mind, and we just heard from the keynote that is really important. It can create the preconditions for exchange. Again, something that was just earlier deemed as being one of the fundamentals. It can help to showcase marginal communities, which again, important for civil society, and it can allow for the emergence of minority narratives.
Great.
So I think to start off of giving you a little bit of an idea of where the importance of education is here.
Thank you for that. Let me now bring in Laura. So going from the broader European context to a very specific one here, we're going to talk about the Archive of Diaries, or the small Museum of Diaries, which was born from a very powerful intuition, which is creating a space where the history of a country is constructed from the building blocks of personal stories of the common people. Can you tell us, with the evolution of this project, the shape that it's taken and the definition of shared memory that you are trying to put forward?
Yeah, good morning to all of you. For instance, I would like to say that I'm speaking now to you from the National Archive of Diaries in Italy. We're not far from Arezzo and Florence in Tuscany. The ones that you see behind me are diaries and self-writings of the so-called common people that since 1984, starting from the intuition of journalist and writer Saverio Tutino, we collect in here in this little town. And this little town at the end, by the end of Second World War, was completely destroyed because it was undermined by the Nazi army withdrawing from Italy. And what Tutino, the founder of this place, realized was that people had the need to tell about how this place looked like before the war, because they didn't have any money referring points, and so that's how it all began, from the need of, in a way, finding a substitute to the previous town, made by walls, made by houses, with the memories. The memories offered a way of putting up together, literally, the community. So that's how it was born in here. And then after that, it became a national place because from the newspapers, they advised, I wasn't even born by the time, people to look up in their houses and find diaries and self-writings. And so that's how almost now 10,000 stories of people talking about their immigration abroad, talking about wars, First World War, Second World War, and from many different points of view also. That's the point here about the shared memories. Because in here you can find in the alphabetical order, staying on the shelves, maybe someone who during Second World War fought with the fascist side, let's say, to simplify it, and others that, and another one, another writer, another author, that after the armistice of September 1943 decided to go and fight with the partisans. So and they all together they are the little pieces of another way of telling stories, of course, history, of course. So that's how it was born back in 1984, and it has grown a lot. We have now 10,000 stories coming from all over Italy. And also in 2013, the Little Museum of Diaries was born, and there we found a way of telling to visitors how some of course, just some of the stories can also impress the visitor by not only by their material substance, not just papers, but we also found a way of mixing reading of by actors and pictures and the written pages themselves in order to tell these stories to visitors. So that's basically briefly how it is.
So looking back at the message that Alina talked about, she talked about collective memory having several elements. One of them is cultural memory, which comes from objects, and your diaries helped to recreate a town that no longer physically existed. So it was that connection and building up the collective memories. So thank you, Laura, for sharing the experience. Dinika, let me bring you in now. Because you work on the intercultural dialogue in museum and heritage contexts. And I raised some of the challenges that can be when you look back at the past. And how do you feel about the past when it may not be thing that aligns with our values of today? But, tell us a little bit more about how we deal with possibly conflictual memories, contested memories. Laura talked about, you have people who fought on two different sides and then have to find a way forward. There's two different histories, and often it's the victor who gets to write the history rather than the other side. So can you tell us how you managed to build a dialogue within the community on these uncomfortable issues or contested memories?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, the first thing I want to add up, also relating to our keynote speaker, is to introduce also nature. We have had objects and we had diary. And I'm thinking about the way we started our exhibition in the Castle of Zuilen last year with a meeting of all people who felt close to the history of slavery. And most of those people were descendants of enslaved people. And we started with a conversation in the garden below the tree in that beautiful place, castle, that was built on the money that was earned from enslaved people. So in that place, those two came together, but we started a conversation with the communities of the descendants of the enslaved people. because you know, the dialogue came later, and also at the opening there was a beautiful ritual led by a woman who is descendant from the indigenous community of Suriname, where many of the enslaved people also came from, and there this whole ritual was really very impressive. But I want to go back also to another instance, the first that I experienced actually with this subject of slavery and the people who carry the history of enslavement within their bodies and within their memories, and who have the most knowledge on a different level than you can find in the archives about this history. And that moment was when my colleague, friend, and I, Ineke Mok, started with a project in the city of Haarlem on what traces can you find in this city of the history of slavery. And we had found some in the archive, you know, looking for keywords, and then you find some from the archival traces. But of course, as you said just now, history is written by the victors, so, and also by the people in power. So the traces you find in the archive about people who were enslaved are very slim. You know, you only see them as property and as objects. Whereas they, of course, were also people with who have managed to survive and who were resilient, or who were killed, but who have in another way left traces. Well, that meeting was very special. There came, I think we were with 15 people. We just did a simple round of what do you know about this history? What were you told within your house and your household? And there were many people that hadn't learned something from home about this history, because shame is all over the place here. But there were other people who had learned in the form of, for instance, children's songs. There's one song, it's called Faya Siton no bron miso, no bron miso. Faya Siton no bron miso, no bron miso. Aji masra yanchi kiri sumapichin. Aji masra yanchi kiri sumapichin. This is a Surinamese song that I learned from several Surinamese people. And it is still sung today by children. And the content of the song is so revealing. It says, burning stone, don't burn me so much. It has a movement that people, that children play. So they make some things from a tree and they make it hot. And then they turn it to the next child. And then in the meanwhile, they sing this song. Please don't burn me so much. Today, Master Jantje, which is a Dutch name, has killed another child. So this whole trauma history is there in the words of this song, and it is sung by children today. And it is such an important way of expressing heritage and of getting heritage into the next generation in a way that has actually nothing to do with objects or museums. It's completely intangible heritage, but it's so important to add that into the way you look at heritage and can work with communities. And when we did this round in Haarlem, well, all sorts of memories, stories, etc., came up from the people.
Thank you, Dineke. How interesting to hear how you can find the trace of the intergenerational trauma and the sort of the banality of a child's life being being taken is just repeated in a song, and until you look beneath the layers to understand it, you've lost the transmission of the memory, and that's so important. Thank you. Maya, I'm going to bring you in now because we're going to get even more complex. Looking at the world today, which is so very polarized, it's sometimes difficult to even start a dialogue on memory. And the Project Clara coordinates or addresses precisely this issue. It's non-violent communication approach in adult education in historical museums and memorial sites. So can you tell us what's meant by a non-violent communication approach, and particularly looking at the issue of the Holocaust?
This method was founded by Marshall Rosenberg, and his idea was to stress out that even if we have these different memories and different approaches and different ideas, and yes, sometimes it can be lies against truth, like, for example, some kind of anti-Semitic lies or Holocaust deniers that we usually also have in our museums time after time. What to do with these people? How to address them? To not harm them, to not harm ourselves, but still be able to have this connection. And this method, nonviolent communication, it doesn't mean that you just don't hit and that's it, like, or you don't shout and that's it. You're a very non-violent person, yes. But we know other ideas of violence, how to be violent. You can be very calm and very polite, but still violent. So the idea is to strip everything down and look for a person there. And the only thing that this method says, that you can build a connection with this person if you use this method right. And after this conversation, you can also do not feel that harm is done to you, because you can use empathy towards other person, or you can use empathy to yourself. So Marshall Rosenberg would say, be a giraffe, because giraffes has the biggest heart and in the animals world. And he would say, stay in the giraffe mode with this huge heart, and don't let your shakal out. Yeah, so that would be his suggestion. And in every museum that participates in this project, our museum, Janusz Lipke Memorial, who is dedicated to the first Righteous Among the Nations in Latvia, Janusz Lipke, who managed to save approximately 50 people, most of them they were Jews, from the Nazis. And he had no money, no powerful documents that would protect, only his, I would say, criminal mind, because he was a smuggler before the war. And other museums like Polin Museum in Warsaw, Memorial de la Shoah in Paris, and also Holocaust Memorial Center in Skopje, we have all experienced what it's like when the person who comes here only pretends that he or she wants to learn, but in fact they want to provoke, or they want to make you realize that Holocaust didn't happen, or that Jews were guilty of something, etc. And in this new conflict, for example, the Mr. or I don't know if I call him Mr. Lavrov, he repeated this old lies that Hitler himself was a Jew. So imagine the next few weeks among our visitors who listens to everything that is now said or done by Russians and by Ukrainians, just to keep in touch with the situation, what the ideas came also towards our museum. And just not to so control your shakal, because it's a human reaction when you hear something so horrible. Calm down and go towards the giraffe attitude. Try to understand what is beyond the words that were said. And Marshall himself quotes a nice quote from a poet Rumi. Somewhere beyond right and wrong, there's a garden. I will meet you there. So he promises this garden that we can come and talk to each other, maybe we won't change our minds, but maybe something will click and world will become a better place.
Thank you for that, and I love this idea of encouraging people to move into giraffe mode. And giraffes have this lovely long neck, which allows them to look up and over and see more perspective, and it also allows them to reach the juiciest leaves at the top of the tree. So there's benefits in being a giraffe and not letting your inner jackal out. Aline, let me bring you in, because we've now just been touching on some of the challenges looking at the Holocaust, where there is quite a strong, denial movement, and issues can be very tense. Before you joined Maastricht University, you were actually a researcher at the Dachau concentration camp memorial site, where you were responsible for human rights education in the international office. What do you see as the role of these spaces, such as memorial sites or museums, in a dialogue with the community, and possibly creating a European transnational memory culture, especially when that culture is being rejected by some political parties?
Yeah, indeed. I think like one of the roles is that they make memory tangible. Memorial sites are authentic places. And this is also obviously one of the reasons why many people visit them. But what we also see there is indeed what we just heard from Maya, that lots of people go there, not only because they want to learn, they want to see something about the past, they feel that they can do that better in places where things have happened. But you also have a lot of people who do this for dark tourism purposes. So they want to be scared, for example. They want to see the gas chambers and find that only interesting because people have suffered there. So this is one of the challenges, of course, all these authentic places are facing. Most memorial sites know this phenomenon. And when I worked there, I was not only surprised about, on the one hand, this, but also on how political the place itself was. So this is really where memory politics is made. You have those different communities that are, to a certain extent, vying for dominance, vying for the right to determine what is being taught, especially when it comes to, deciding on like what story is being told, what narrative is going to be the one that the visitors hear. And that really surprised me. I somehow thought that these are places of remembrance, first and foremost. And they are, of course. But at the same time, you have this political dimension there, which is sometimes so strong that it, I think, deters attention from the actual aim here. And what I saw on the one hand is like, well, you have these political tensions that are there. But then, of course, the memorial site itself and the education program, they're also dealing with other challenges that are simply have to do with the fact that we're moving into cultural memory here, right? The last survivors of the Holocaust are dying. And then the question is, how can you get this story to the young people for whom the Holocaust and World War II is really far away? Or how do you involve people that do not identify at all with this history, who've maybe come from a completely different cultural background where World War II does not play a role? And the solution to that, I think, is really to move away from the very specific. So not only talk about Holocaust and World War II as such, but talk about the structures that allowed the Holocaust to happen, because that's something that young people can relate to. They often had experiences of being bullied in school. They know how exclusion mechanisms work. They've hopefully not, but some of them have experienced racism. And if you start talking about this, then suddenly this history becomes more tangible, and the place, the memorials themselves start making sense. And that also goes for including the stories of migrants, for example, of refugees. It all becomes much more tangible that way.
Thank you, Aline. Laura, I'll bring you in here, because you will. I can see a picture of you surrounded by all these lovely diaries. How do these diaries, provoke and create a dialogue with the community, and how do those stories then build to a new narrative of the national identity and history?
Okay, sorry, I forgot to activate my. Well, as I told you before, that the fact is, in here, there was, since the very beginning, the need of collecting any story. So there is no prevention. There is no I mean, prejudice against any point of view on history that's revealed not to be, the right one or the winning one. So, for instance, in here, the only need is to be to collect authentic stories, true stories. So the need is not to have, for example, novels, and that's actually a tricky point for us to focus on what is autobiography, what is the self-writing, what is autofiction, what is telling a story how I would like it to be, or how I wished it was. We don't have the difficulty in having several points of view. We have difficulties sometimes in having authentic stories. So we have to focus on that kind of problem. But when you have so many different points of view on a specific event, let's say, for example, as we do have many stories recounting about Italian going abroad since the 19th century, the half of 19th century, going to the US, going to Latin America, and having many different kind of lives in there. And so we basically make up a big picture in collecting all these different contributions, because you have people that I know that I'm moving from a very dramatic part of history, that is the war and the Holocaust, to something that it too was dramatic, but not only dramatic, at least. So when we have these stories, we have, for example, the one that found his fortune in the U.S. and maybe has become a millionaire, and the other one who struggled for all his life and struggled also because he couldn't find himself welcomed in the U.S., for instance. So we basically make we have a human capital here, made up by this difference, made up by all these several points of view put together. Can I add to something that I heard from
Yes,
my?
please go ahead.
We also have this kind of curiosity to something that Aline said, and Maya also before. We also have this kind of curiosity sometimes from visitors that are attracted by, let's say, I don't know, stories about people that were deported during the, I don't know, Second World War, Italian Jews community, and they do not, they're not attracted because they are researchers. They just want to, to be in a way shocked. They want to be in a way, they're looking for this kind of a spectacularization of the drama. But in the end, I believe that they are the minority of people in here. They are just a few, because I would say that I can understand that in a place like Dachau, it's much more common. But in an archive, for instance, you put yourself in the condition of going through lines and of reading and searching through the lines, something that implies an effort of understanding also how this person expressed himself or herself. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Dineke, let me bring you in now to pick up on this, because we want to explore how we involve citizens and how we can encourage dialogue. You've mentioned a few examples, but let's find out a little bit more, particularly what are the skills needed to create that safe space to allow what we heard, stripping away out all of the identity in order to encourage people to go into giraffe mode and not jackal mode.
Thank you. I also like the giraffe mode a lot, as well as the swimming metaphor that a beautiful keynote speaker mentioned, Vanessa Di Oliveira Andriotti. That swimming metaphor I liked very much. And first I want to add up to what Aline said. If you know the project that the Anne Frank House made with, I think, at least 9 European countries, called Stories That Move. There's a beautiful website, also a lot of teachers' materials there. And it goes from Holocaust education to exactly what Aline just mentioned. And I've worked in the Anne Frank House until 2001. And one of my ex-colleagues, she was also very much involved in that. Yes, the skills. Well, I learned a lot from Ido Abram, who used to be our professor in Holocaust education. And he and my also deceased friend and photographer, Jenny Wesley, they made a method called identity circles. And that is based on actually the ABCD, or the arena model that Ido Abram developed, which is autobiography, biography, conflict, and dialogue. And it's exchanging between, it's very simple, it's exchanges between 2 people. And there's a question there. For instance, you can ask, what is your contested heritage? And then you start a conversation, or you start a very open conversation with the question, tell me something about your life, or what is important in your life. And you can help that conversation by making an identity circle. So if you think about what is important in your life, then this pizza part may be that I'm a woman. This might be that I'm a Dutch. This might be that I'm white. Well, because I know that gives me some privilege. Perhaps I wouldn't have thought to mention that before having had that education. But anyway, because I have a sort of a history education, or well, because I love to swim, because I love to bike and skate, etc. So then you can make such an identity circle, and you can talk about that circle with the other person who has also made a circle, and ask more questions about that. Or you can also ask the other person to make a image circle about you, because there's also always a lot of difference between how people see you and how you see yourself. And there's a closed window there that you never see how other people see you. So if you go into such a conversation, you can learn about how other people see you. But also you can learn very more other layers about the other people, the other person in front of you. Well, there's a lot of projects who have worked with this idea, and both Jenny and Ido have made a lot of identity circles in several workshops, and there's also a website which gathers them. I also would like to manage our website, Mapping Slavery, because that brings forward the traces of slavery that brings those traces closer to home, and they can also act as a start of a conversation about contested memories and contested subjects. And then finally, for this, perhaps I may quote Gandhi when he was asked, "What do you think about Western civilization?" He said, "That would be a good idea." And that brings me to the need to decolonize our minds. And if we learn more to listen to people who have been colonized, or specifically perhaps to Black women, because Black women know so much about how to survive without having privilege. And when you are in a position of not having the privilege or not having the power, you have to learn and to know a lot more about the people who are in power than the other way around. When you are in a position of power, there's not so much need to know how the inside of those minds of people and minds and bodies of people who are not in power works. So power is important in every one of these conversations.
Thank you very much, Dinika. I'm going to bring Maya in, and then after that, we're going to have some questions from the audience. So be ready for that. Maya, can you give us some concrete examples of the kinds of challenges that you experience in trying to build dialogue through empathy? We heard about, dark tourism and people who are, seeking extreme sensations, who go to some of these sites just to be shocked or horrified or present their own worldview. But can you take us through a difficult interaction with a museum visitor and what approach you use to tackle it and build these bridges of empathy that you spoke about earlier?
Well, my most recent, we would say, example is the question: what do Jews look like? Because in the memoirs, they themselves, the survivors in Holocaust, they would use this sentence, "I didn't look like a Jew." So they let me out of something. I got out of trouble by not looking as a Jew. And imagine a young mind reading this sentence. And imagine this young child, these young adults, they sometimes do not realize that there are a lot of Jewish people in the world, in the movies, in music that they are listening, etc., or on the streets. We have a small Jewish community, but still, what does it mean to not or to look like a Jew? And this sentence actually triggered something in my colleagues in France, in Memorial de la Shoah, because one of the teenagers said, "I know how to recognize the Jew." And that's the same sentence. Is either I look or do not look like a Jew, or I can recognize someone by just looking at this person. So Giraffe, first of all, yes, have the perspective. Second of all, have this big heart. And now we have to touch this subject. And we are trying to, for example, with the school kids, they are like 16, 17, 18 years old, approach this theme, and some ugly stereotypes, of course, come out. I guess in France or in Latvia, they are still universal, these stereotypes. And we discuss piece by piece, what does it mean? And what's the danger if you look at the world through the stereotype glasses? And why, for example, why do you need to recognize this person as a Jewish to celebrate with them some, some holidays, or you want to avoid these people, to take them out of your life? What's the reason behind it? And then to go to this example from history when horrible people measured it, children, for example, to understand is he or she Jewish or not. So from a simple phrase, you see, we can build a conversation, and it has to be in safe space. I can't just bring my shakal in and say, you're a horrible person, you're anti-Semitic, and etc., etc. But be a giraffe. Be kind to yourself first of all, and to others, and bring the situation. But this method works every time, in professional shoes, in private shoes, or hats. So we can switch the hats. It was very useful during the pandemic, for example, when some people said it's okay to put a yellow star if you protest the vaccination. So what to do? Shakal is always ready to wake up and to go and fight, but we have to heal our community. We cannot just tear it apart and make this pit even bigger between those who believe this way or that way. We have to build bridges, otherwise it will end up in some horrible place again.
Thank you, Maya. I've got a question for the whole panel to reflect on. We've spoken several times this morning about the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, and what this has created large numbers of refugees who've left the country, who bring with them their stories in the countries they go to. In other areas, there are different perspectives about who started this, who's responsible for it, whose fault is it, what does it mean? So, panel, the question that we've had from Sandra on our platforms is, in the context of the current war in Ukraine, what are the main risks that you see in the interplay between different memories? Because we're watching, sort of drones and bombs falling right now, and there are people who've had to pack their bags. So there's a lot of memories, personal memories and news stories that are being created that may well be the source of future conflict. So what are your suggestions? And maybe, Maya, I'll start with you, because you said we have to heal, not build on divides, but all of the members of the panel are welcome to respond. Maya, do you have any wisdom for us?
Well, Latvia is very close to these events. And also, I would say that World War II was such a huge trauma, also in our community. And now we see similar feelings and similar tragedies and similar crimes done by the Russian army to Ukrainians and these refugees. So it triggers huge traumatic memories in our own community. And during this traumatic experience, we still have to live next to Russian-speaking community here in Latvia, for example. And by Russian-speaking, I mean Russians, yes, but also Belarusians, Ukrainians, also Jewish community is mostly Russian-speaking at home, for example. So actually, that's a mix of, even they have conflicts among themselves right now. Well, who is lying, Ukraine or Russia? Yeah, so even on this scale, so it is very, very hot and intense, and any phrase can actually become very, very aggressive. Like the aggression, either verbal or even physical, can appear. Just one phrase or one Ukrainian flag or something, it can trigger a violence. So it is extremely, extremely important to stay in giraffe's mode right now. That's our only hope to actually to coexist, to not blow it even bigger than it is right now. And during all this, also remember how to help refugees, because Latvians also were refugees when the World War II hit. So, and suddenly we can see and we can feel the pain of refugees. That wasn't the case. I'm so sorry to say it, but it wasn't the case with dark-skinned refugees, for example. Yeah. So suddenly, these refugees, if they look like me, their homes look like mine, their teddy bears look like mine. Like I don't know, they drive the same car. It builds a connection, and I hope you all know that Latvia gives the biggest amount of help to Ukraine right now. We are very proud of ourselves that that we are not ignoring and turning blind eye, and we are not bystanders in this situation.
Thank you. Alina, maybe I could bring you in on this, because one of the things that I found very shocking over the last few days is there was an image that came out of one of the towns that had been occupied by the Russians, and there was a bucket of gold teeth. And this brings back very strong memories, cultural memories of the Holocaust in concentration camps, seeing buckets of, teeth or glasses or things like that. So it's very clear, I think, anyone who's been watching what's happening there, that there will be terrible stories and terrible histories that come out of it, and different perspectives. From having worked at that front line, what advice would you give, and what are the risks that you see of different contested memories?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, you have these memories that trigger other memories. So we just heard about this, what this could do to communities that then suddenly turn against each other. But I also see another risk, which is the political abuse of those memories. And we see that happening on both sides, really. Yeah? We see how much Putin, I should say. I'm not even saying Russia, because this is mainly coming from Putin. We have to be careful to not always talk about Russia and put all Russians in one box. But he's been using references to the past constantly to legitimize his aims. And the same is happening actually on the Western side, often then harking back to World War I, World War II, to justify why certain political decisions have been taken. And at the same time that I think eclipsing a little bit what is actually happening and how individuals are experiencing this on the ground. So I think sometimes the one of the risks I see, it's only one of the risks, is really that we suddenly start moving on two different levels. The political level, where references to the past are used as some sort of weapon, and then the actual human level, where memories are being produced now that might be very detrimental for the future and the possibilities of communities to stay living together once the war is over.
Thank you. Laura, let me bring you in, because a significant proportion of the population in Ukraine has been displaced, either internally or abroad. And each one of them is potentially writing a little diary. And a diary which then might be, I can imagine, a future equivalent of your museum, but for parts of Ukraine. What do you think is the role of education mechanisms to try and bring together these stories and acknowledge the authenticity, the reality of the lived experience of the people who wrote them, but also to create a context that allows people to find a shared collective memory?
Tamsin, let me add that maybe even a Russian soldier is writing something, and who am I in the future to say, no, I don't want to read that because he was evil and he was bad? Or it's a huge question, the one dealing with the very present we are living in, and the fact that someone just chose to sit down and write down his own reflections kind of asks me, and if of course wants to share those reflections, of course wants to bring those reflections in a place like this, for example, asks me and others for attention. So it's a big question, the one that Sandra here has asked to us. I don't know. I for instance, I would say, yeah, let's dress the giraffe heart, of course, but at the same time, for my education, for my speaking about myself, I know that I'm talking about memories. I need time in order to feel not so I don't know, not so warm and not so to put a kind of distance between the very present, the very moment, and the consideration of what it tells me about. So that's my educations. That's what we do in here. We have this benefit of time. Also, we have memories coming from the very present too, sure. But in that case, it's really unusual to get the point of view that everybody feels like disturbing, or I don't know, in this very moment. So when I was referring about the diaries of diary of a fascist soldier put close to the diary of a partisan, of course the diary of the fascist soldier came here after that. Several years has passed, and maybe heirs and nephews, grandsons, so whoever decided to send it here. But there is time in the middle, and time cannot be always the answer for healing, of course. And sure, you cannot say to Ukrainians, okay, we need time, but in a place that has among its aims and goals education is a point more.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Dineke, let me bring you in as the last.
Sorry, Tamsin. I'm really sorry, but I'm really sorry to leave this beautiful, interesting meeting. But I really have to go now and leave the room for my colleagues in here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura, for your participation. Dineke, let me bring you in as the last element on the panel. And I think there's something we haven't touched on yet, or you just referenced it, where you talked about, the trauma that people have in their bodies that, goes back and shows signs from a long time ago. And I wonder if we should just talk about the invisible and the visible traces of memory, because going back to Sandra's question, what are the risks of the interplays of different memories? When somebody's injured with a war, you can see an injury, but there's a lot of psychological injury. And right at the beginning, our keynote speaker talked about the fact that we have this huge rise in anxiety and fear and depression in the world because of some of the crisis that we have here. And Dineke, what can you share about? I love the open questions you used, which is, tell us about yourself, tell us about your history, how do you perceive yourself? And that would allow some of the hidden traumas, the hidden concerns to come forward and to be acknowledged. And this is perhaps the beginning of the kinds of conversations that need to happen so that people can deal with the very present challenges of Ukraine. So can you give us a hopeful message to end about how dialogue can bring forth the visible and the invisible that are so important to be acknowledged about people's identity?
Well, thank you very much for this beautiful question. I feel a lot of cultural humility in the midst of it. My eyes so much closer to Ukraine in the daily experience of it. I had to think also a lot about, especially recently with these drone attacks, about the film Forsana, which played in Syria and in an underground hospital in Syria that was constantly bombed by Russian planes, especially because they knew that if hospitals were destroyed, that people would go away from their neighborhoods. And the filmmaker for Sama, they got a child during this horrible war, and that's also the reason that she made this film, also to tell her daughter about how they managed to be resilient against all this violence and all this weaponry, and to keep the human stories of solidarity alive. So I think that is very important to remember, that culture, films, objects, heritage, nature, the world, gives us a lot to build forward on, and especially the contact with other people.
Thank you very much, Dineka. I'm going to now bring our panel to a close. So can I say a warm thank you to Dineka, to Alina, to Maya, and also to Laura, who is with us. This was a dialogue around education, community, and memory, and it was a really fascinating exchange. And thank you all to the audience for watching and engaging. Let me just now wrap up some of the things that we've discussed today, and I'll give you some insights as to what's going to happen for the rest of the conference. Let me just take us through a couple of the points that I remember from this morning that I think was so important. We said that the theme of this year's community conference is imagine, daring to imagine things differently and do things differently. And our keynote speaker right at the beginning, Professor Vanessa Andriotti, opened that up with some really strong messages, and she encouraged us to move away from the kind of mastery education which says get a skill, learn how to do it, and move it on. And she encouraged us to have this more patient approach, to look at depth and complexity. She encouraged us to acknowledge our space in the world and to bring hope from the future and bring it into the present. And that's a way of empowering yourself at a time when there are so many uncertainties, because when things are uncertain, you want a certainty, you want an answer, a technical solution, you want a concrete thing, which is why people often get drawn to extreme political movements. And she's encouraged us to sit with that uncomfortableness, and she left us with an image of in Russia when they go to, or in Scandinavian countries where there's strong ice, you make a hole in the ice. Imagine that. You have to actually dig down, usually with a saw, to make a hole in thick ice. And then you dive in. And it told us about what that's like. First of all, there's the pain, there's the shock. Your body hits freezing water, and then there's pain. And then gradually your body acclimatizes and you are fully in the body experience. And it's a new way of thinking. So she encourages to open us up to our senses and to explore on that. We needed to move away from the certainties and move towards the uncomfortable spaces, and to use the knowledge from indigenous communities that feel much more connected to nature and open themselves to learning through it. And she opened us this conversation to invite others in our learning journey. Then we had a panel looking at some of the challenges of education in environment where you have memory, that for every person, their own story is how they saw the world, it's how they experienced the world, but it may be different for others. And we talked about dialogue and this idea of the giraffe heart. It's got the biggest heart of all the animals. And if you move towards your giraffe environment rather than letting the angry jackal out that would immediately respond with aggression or fear, but try to see the other person and in their reality, see their identity, and build a bridge of empathy. And we heard about, particularly for children, they often will understand the experience of bullying or exclusion or racism. They've understood that. And if they can use that to then look at the bigger picture, they can understand the historical context. We talked about the different ways of collecting people together in a space that allows some of these stories to come forward and create a new collective memory that cannot be politicized because it acknowledges the truth of everyone's experiences. So it was a really interesting and very rich discussion. I hope you find it was an invitation to imagine. So that was just the first of our many conversations that will happen over the next 3 days. And we want you to use the EPALE platform as a mechanism to share your ideas. We want you to share your videos, your drawings, your pictures, your voice notes, anything you want. Please use that and share it on the platform. Here, what sparks your imagination? So use the hashtag #ImagineEPALE. We're looking to see how education for adults makes this such a vibrant community. We have a survey we are doing. We want to know, what are your habits and experiences of using EPALE? And we know we've got 120,000 people who've joined the EPALE community. We want to know what works with this, and that Within that survey, you'll also find there are a few questions specifically about this conference. Only takes a few minutes to complete that. At the moment, the survey is only in English, but it will soon be available in all of the EPALE languages. And the time frame for us to complete that survey about how you use the EPALE website and what you want from it is the 15th of November. So we want to hear from you. We spoke quite a lot this morning about the war in Ukraine, and we wanted to acknowledge that the European Commission has put some tools in place to allow the adult education community to respond. So there is a new Erasmus Plus register of education and training staff that can offer support for Ukrainian refugees. So if you want to contact volunteers, if you want to be a volunteer or get involved, you can visit the register. You can put your information there and see if you can be connected up with projects that are offering practical logistical support for Ukrainian refugees in Europe. We talked a lot this morning about stories and narratives and how we build them and how they help us understand ourselves and our place in the world. And this year's theme on EPALE for the community stories is we want to know from you, what's your passion or motivation as an adult educator? What's your earliest experience of learning? What makes you feel accomplished at the end of the day? So please go onto the EPALE community stories, and you've got some fabulous videos and stories of people sharing what brought them to be an adult educator, what fulfills them, what was the trigger for them, what excited them. So this year we've got some really strong personal memories, and I do encourage you to go and look at some of those stories. They're incredibly inspiring, and maybe you will recognize yourself in the same motivation that you had to come forward to do your adult learning. This is an open call for your stories until the 30th of October. And we have a wonderful short video that will encourage you. We'll be putting the link to that so you can see it. But go on to the community stories section of the EPALE platform and share what was your inspiration, what was your motivation, what was your path into adult education. So thank you all for participating. It's been a really wonderful opening plenary session. I hope your heart is as full as mine feels, because we are moving towards our giraffe heart, and your heart can only get bigger and expand with more stories that come forward. This is the end of the plenary session. The next activity that will be transmitted will be the community workshop on community-based practices for empowerment that will start at 11:30 tomorrow morning. 11:30 this morning, so in about 10 minutes. We will also be having more workshops that will happen throughout the next few days. There are 17 national support services that are having their activities and holding live broadcasts to bring together their communities. Thank you for joining us. We know you're doing a fabulous job of amplifying our messages. Thank you all. Our plenary will start tomorrow morning at 10. For those of you who've registered for the workshops, the next workshop will start in just a few minutes. Thank you all. See you tomorrow.